Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us today on what promises to be an amazing session. We are so honored to have President Santos with us. He is a living legend in my book with so much wisdom to share and insights. We're going to just give a few more minutes for more people to join us. We know we have hundreds of people registered for this event, and it's going to be recorded. We're going to be tweeting and writing articles about it. So the lessons and the insights will definitely be amplified. So just give us a few more minutes to welcome a few more people. I'm also delighted at this point to also introduce the Dean of the Maxwell School, Professor Chris Rangan, who is a leader in public policy, recognized for his scholarship, his pioneering work, but also his great role as the visionary and leader behind Maxwell School. I've been honored to spend a few hours with Chris over the last few months, learning from him. And I'm really inspired by his vision, his passion, and his commitment to educating the next generation of public service leaders, the next generation of nonprofit leaders, the next generation of global leaders who pass through the Maxwell School. So thank you, Chris, for all the good work that you do. And thank you for the opportunity to be a scholar at the Maxwell School, which truly has been a blessing. I'll pass it over to Chris now to introduce President Santos and to kick us off.
Thank you, Ndidi. That's very nice. Very, very, very kind remarks. Everybody that has registered here, you should know that this is the third or possibly the fourth of a series that Ndidi is putting together as one of the McConnell scholars that are visiting the Maxwell School this year. And this is a series that is based on and focused on sustainability, shaping local and global policy, utilizing data, enabling partnerships and digital technology, lots of good stuff. They've been great workshops. And today we have a very special treat to welcome to our school virtually, President Juan Manuel Santos. Juan Manuel Santos served as the president of Colombia from 2010 to 2018. Before he was president, but still in government, he was the Minister of Foreign Trade, the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of Defense. So here is a man who has been around the policy block, I think would be a fair thing to say. His education is interesting. I'm an economist, and for the students that are in the audience today, my economics course will be starting in about a week. And you'll be pleased to see, I think, that President Santos has a degree in business and economics from the University of Kansas. He then went to the London School of Economics. He went also to the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy in Boston, and then just went across town to another part of Boston to go to the Harvard Kennedy School, where he got a master's in public administration. So those are very interesting degrees, and you can think about that education leading you, if you are careful and hardworking, into the presidency or the prime ministership of your country. As I was looking today at the long list of accomplishments from President Santos, and there is a long list, I just wanted to point out 4 of them because they really show you the variation. This is not, President Santos is not only interested in one thing, he has been interested and accomplished in many things. So at the top of the list probably is to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2016 for his efforts to end the protracted war with the guerrilla organization named FARC in Colombia. A second thing, quite different, he, as Ministry of the, or serving as Ministry of the Environment, he increased the marine protected areas by 10 times, from 1.2 million hectares in 2010 to 12.8 million hectares in 2018. That's an enormous increase in environmental protection. Completely other type of accomplishment. During his tenure, 4.7 million Colombians escaped financial poverty, and over 1 million were given free or subsidized housing. A terrific accomplishment. And the final thing I'll just mention is that he orchestrated major investments in public infrastructure. All of our countries need more and better public infrastructure, and that's something that President Santos can be rightly proud of. All of that you can be rightly proud of. President Santos, thank you very much for joining us today. We are really looking forward to hearing your discussion with Ndidi. And as you said in the introductory comments, no questions are impertinent, but only the answers. We look forward to the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Rangan, for that very kind and very warm introduction. And I'm truly honored to engage President Santos in a discussion over the next 30 to 40 minutes before we open it up to your questions from the audience. And we look forward to a very lively discussion. Ask all the tough questions you have, put them into the Q&A or chat box as we proceed, so you don't forget them. But we'll be taking a few questions from me before we open it up to questions from you. So President Santos, thank you again for joining us today. It truly is an honor and privilege to have you on here. I want to start off with your very early years. When did you know that you would pursue a career in public service?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this invitation. I'm honored to be here with you. I share a part of my experience with you. And Ndidi, to answer your question, I was in journalism. My family has been for generation in journalism. My family owned a newspaper. So I was a journalist, and in one occasion, I was offered to go into government, and I went to ask two very wise persons that their criteria for me was very important. And they said, listen, you will have a lot of influence if you stay in journalism. You're probably going to become the publisher of the newspaper. It's the most important newspaper in Colombia. And you'll have a tremendous amount of influence for the rest of your life. But the influence is different from having power. And having power is the capacity to change and do things. And there's a tremendous difference between having influence and having power. And I think you want to change things. You don't want to influence change. You want to be the responsible for change. So I advise you to go into public life and to take that risk, because it's always a risk, and change your sort of objectives. So that's how I made the decision to go into public life and into politics, and taking a high risk, because in politics you can be successful, or many times you simply are not. You're not successful. So I took the risk, and fortunately things went all right.
I love it. Influence versus power to make a difference. And clearly there are lots of students on here who have chosen to go to a public policy school and to follow in the path that you have outlined. How did this MPA at the Harvard Kennedy School prepare you for your future career in public service? And why did you choose to get a master's in public administration?
Well, I was a Fulbright fellow, and I applied to the Kennedy School also a bit because of romantic reasons. President Kennedy had been in Colombia many years before, and I remembered his visit, and I had this sort of romantic image of President Kennedy, and I wanted to go to the school that has his name. And when I won the Fulbright Fellowship, they said, you can go to Harvard. And I said, oh, can I go to the Kennedy School? Would you finance that? And they said yes. And so that's how I ended up at the Kennedy School. And it helped me a lot in my public life. I remember taking, what I did was, I didn't specialize in any certain topic. No, I took courses, very general courses. I remember a course that was called Uses of History, how to use history in the best way possible. That was a very useful course for me. I had a course in the law school on negotiation. That has helped me tremendously. You negotiate in your own house, in your business, in your in politics, and every time you're permanently negotiating. So that course was extremely important. And so the answer is yes, it prepared me a lot. It gave me some tools and some good ideas that you always have to renovate. This is extremely important. Education, the other Nobel laureate, but this time in literature in Colombia was Garcia Marquez. And he used to say, education begins when you're born and should end when you die. You have to permanently be educated. And this is something that I sincerely advise everybody to do. You are in a permanent process of education. You never learn enough.
Terrific. And clearly you positioned yourself very well. When Chris was mentioning all the different roles you've played in public service, those were unique roles. And Colombia is not an easy country. How did you position yourself with your education to get these roles? And what are some things they did not teach you in school about public service? People always tell me, what didn't they teach you at Harvard Business School that you've learned in the real world? What are some things you had to learn the hard way?
Well, one of the first things that I did was get involved with the coffee business. Colombia, at that time, that was in the early 80s, depended on coffee for foreign exchange. About 70% of our exports was coffee. And I had graduated in economics and business, but I had no idea about coffee. So I said, if I'm going to be a successful economist in my country, I need to know about coffee. So I applied for a post in the National Federation of Coffee Growers, which is a very powerful institution. They contracted me, and that's how I started my career. Coffee, that added to my education. It was more of a practical education. I learned the nitty-gritties of coffee production and coffee making. I remember I was sent to Brussels to learn how to taste coffee. Like you learn how to taste wine, you do the same thing with coffee. That practical education for me was extremely important. When I went to other areas, that practical education was extremely important. And you also have to you also have to be able to understand the environment you're living in, always. At that time, Colombia was in a very difficult situation. Then I was sent to London, and I arrived in London when London was really in a almost a pre-revolutionary situation. I remember that was in the 70s. It was I remember there was a Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, was in power. Strikes every single day. The garbage in London was unbearable, and I started understanding, the politics of all, the role of the unions, the role of government, the relation between the unions and government and the people. And there in London, I also got attracted to public life and to the dilemmas of public life, seeing what I was seeing in the country where democracy flourished. For the first time, democracy was invented in the British Parliament. So that for me was a very important experience for my public life later on.
I think it's really profound that you were so strategic. Maybe you didn't know it at the time, to understand what's the most important industry And how do I learn about this industry and position myself as a conduit expert in this industry? Many young people, don't recognize how picking the right industry to start off your career is so pivotal to that trajectory. And so we thank you for sharing that insight. Very, very useful. Also that you were a keen observer of every environment in which you found yourself, and even being in London and seeing the right steps to lead and the pitfalls if you don't galvanize the entire community. So that's amazing. Now I want to pivot to your role in public service as Minister of Trade. You position Colombian small businesses and their trade associations for growth and impact. Can you share a few of the examples of what you did and some of the wins, some of the losses along the way?
Yes, Colombia was a very closed country, a very protected country. And so this wave of globalization came not only to Colombia, to all of Latin America, to Africa, all around the world. Remember the Reagan years, the Thatcher years. You have to open up the markets. So I was, my first ministerial job was to be the first Minister of Foreign Trade in Colombia, with the responsibility of opening the economy. And that was very difficult because immediately you had the opposition of the industry, which wanted to maintain protection, high tariffs. So there we encountered a very difficult situation with the industrial structure of the country. We started negotiating the first free trade agreements to have. If we're going to open the economy, we must find markets for our products with preferential treatment. So we started negotiating the free trade agreement. I had to negotiate, I was one of the negotiators to create the World Trade Organization, WTO, in Geneva. I remember it was a very interesting organization. How do developing countries, how should we negotiate the globalization with the industrialized countries? And that was a very important experience, difficult experience, because every country wants to protect their own interest. And so it was a sort of a simultaneous negotiations globally and bilaterally with different countries, starting in the first free trade agreement that I negotiated with Venezuela, which is the country which is close to Colombia, was a natural country to negotiate with. Now, so it was a dramatic change in the whole of the economy, and you had to deal at different levels with different actors, and you had to find a way to find an equilibrium between the different interests, the big industry, the small industries, small businesses, the big business. There, you had to sit down with all of them and try to encounter and to find common ground, that things that for all would be good. It's like they say, when the sea level goes up, everybody should go up, not one and not the other. But how to do it? You have to promote discussion and communication among those different interests and with the private sector. In Colombia, the experience I had with the Coffee Federation, the Coffee Federation had a very unique structure where the coffee farmers had a very important representation in the board of directors of the Coffee Federation. And so they had even a majority, and the ministers of the government, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Development of the government, had the rest of the positions in the board. So they had to, the private sector and the public sector had to agree on all the policies that had to do with coffee. And for me, that was a great example and experience. So I started to promote that type of coordination between the private sector and the public sector when I had to open the economy. And I said, here we all need to agree on how we all can take advantage and benefit from this opening of the economy. So we must agree. For example, in the negotiations at the World Trade Organization or the negotiation in a bilateral free trade agreement, I brought in the private sector to be sort of the main advisors because they were the ones who knew the nitty-gritty of the business. Venezuela produces this product and we produce this one, we can change. They are more efficient here, but we're more efficient there. Many times the public sector or the people in the public sector don't know what the people in the private sector know. So when you, instead of fighting for the specific interest, I told the private sector, help us, let's work together. And so that was extremely important in this very dramatic transition from a closed economy to an open economy. I think this is something that in today's world, I think it's extremely important. The private sector and the public sector need to work together. They're not antagonists. Usually they see each other as antagonists. They should not. There's a synergy if you work together. And later on, I became a believer, and I defend the principles of what was called the third way. I wrote a book with the Prime Minister, Tony Blair of Great Britain, and I had as a teacher the person who invented the third way, that is a very practical way to balance the interest of the private sector and the public sector. If you want to summarize the third way, is that you allow the markets to operate as much as possible, but you intervene from the state point of view always when it's necessary. And with that phrase, you have a very practical approach to handling many of the problems that emerge in a country, and especially this antagonism between the public and the private sectors.
I love that. You know, you have always been a bridge builder, definitely, from an early age. But I want to push a bit on this because I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, yes, it sounds very nice on paper. How do you ensure that one force doesn't dominate the other? The distrust between the two sectors has arisen because sometimes when we let the private sector take free rein, and we've seen this, for example, in technology in recent years, right, where some of our technology players have become so powerful, by the time the public sector is catching up, you know, a market has been made. So when do you know that inflection point as to when to intervene? And how do you, it's almost like a sweet spot. There's a place that is the right spot to intervene without, so you don't want to distort the market, you don't want to curtail the growth, but you want to ensure that you protect the consumers. What are some of the key pointers you look out for to know when to intervene with regulation or when regulation becomes too much?
Well, I had a very unique opportunity because I had to create a new ministry and create the institutions of this new ministry. So I created a new foreign trade bank to finance the exports. Now, in these institutions, what I did was to copy what I had seen many years before in the Coffee Federation. The board of directors of these institutions had a majority of the private sector with the presence of the ministers. Could be the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Trade, the Minister of Development. So you, in a way, what I did was to create the institutions to force, to oblige a dialogue, a constructive dialogue, and that the decisions that were taken on regulations, on whatever, had to be taken in accordance to the interest of all, the public and the private sector. So this was a very unique opportunity that I had because I was appointed minister of a ministry that did not exist. However, you can apply the same philosophy to existing institutions. You can force changes in the structure, but especially in the attitude of the private sector and the public sector by stimulating dialogue, permanent dialogue. Let's find a way out where everybody will benefit. Let's find a way out where the country will benefit. Many times it's not easy. Many times the special interests are very stubborn, but that's when you start to apply pressure, or if you're in the government, or you force more dialogue. By keeping a permanent constructive dialogue, I think this is something key to any government, anywhere in the world. To stop dialogue and to stop speaking is like when you're in a marriage. If you stop talking to your wife or to your husband, the marriage collapses. So you need to continue talking.
The point you're making about, number one, who's sitting at the table, how is that table structured, whose voice is represented, and how do you make sure all voices are represented, and how do you keep that conversation going, is critical. And I think that's very, very useful for us. I think Chris has added a question which I'd like to throw in. He says, how do you draw a line between private sector and public sector? One of my favorite quotes about the role of government is, government should only do what government can do. How do you draw that line? Government should only do what government can do. How do you keep government at bay? And how do you draw that line?
Well, that also depends on the different situations that you find. Where do you draw the line? Sometimes that's why the third way approach is very practical. When the market operates, when there is a competition, you allow the markets to do their work. When the markets are not operating, where there's no efficient markets, when you see a lot of inefficiencies and things are going wrong, then you allow the state to intervene. And you find different situations even within a country. The market for whatever, the flower industry is working well, but the market for the infrastructure is not working well. And you then decide where the state should intervene and where it should not. It's a very practical approach, but as an overall rule, I think that what you need to find is a concerted action, a consensus, okay? For example, between big business and small business, you need to give the small businesses at least the same opportunities that the big businesses have in terms of access to finance. Small businesses don't have the capacity to give guarantees to the banks that will demand X amount of guarantees in order to give a reasonable rate in your finance. Well, that's where the government can intervene and say, okay, I will create a structure to help the small businesses get the necessary guarantees or give the necessary guarantees to the banks for the banks to give them the equivalent financing that they're giving the big businesses. That type of situation is where the government can intervene to make the same level of competition between big business and small business. When you find monopolies, what I did, for example, as Minister of Trade and then Minister of Finance, I made a very strict regulation on promoting competition and breaking monopolies. I remember reading a lot about President Roosevelt, not the second, the first Roosevelt, and his fight against big businesses, how big businesses in a way manipulate and dominate governments because of their power of monopoly. I had that very much in mind, and so I created a very strong structure of regulation against monopolies, and it worked quite well. Of course, it brought me quite a few enemies in the big businesses, but for the economy, it was extremely important. Because I do believe that if you allow the markets to operate, you need them to operate in a competitive atmosphere. If you allow the markets to operate where there are monopolies, then you are in trouble.
I love that aspect of not only creating a level playing field for SMEs using finance and macroeconomic tools, but also ensuring that you have strict anti-competition laws and you enforce them so that there's new market entry, new players can engage. So that's phenomenal. Thank you so much. Now, a lot of government officials are wary about unions and trade associations. In fact, many countries try to keep them at bay. How do you suggest, and how, through your experience, did you actively engage and strengthen unions and industry and trade associations to shape policy and effectively represent their members, doing good instead of doing evil?
Well, the first thing you have to understand is that trade associations usually represent the weakest link of the chain. So this is something you always have to bear in mind. The people who are doing well, they stay quiet. The people who are not doing that well, those are the ones that scream and protest, and the voice of this trade association usually is reflecting the weakest link of the chain. However, this weakest link of the chain will always have a reason to protest or to make their views known. And so what I did is invite not only the spokesmen of the trade association, but members of the trade association. I specifically brought in entrepreneurs, businessmen, CEOs of the big companies and the small companies to, in a way, hear not only the voice of the association as such, but the voice of the people who are actually in the day-to-day business. And that will give you a much better picture of what is really happening. Now, something that you must also bear in mind. Yes, many people are defending their interest, and you have to be aware of that. But usually, they know more than you on specific issues, because they are the ones that are in the business, fighting or struggling to survive day after day. And they always have good ideas of what the government should do. You should hear them and then choose, okay, this I think is a good idea, or this is a bad idea. But this, again, permanent communication is extremely, extremely important for any government official, to be always in touch with reality and with the concerns of the people you are leading. A leader, that's why I say in leadership, the most important word to be a good leader is to have empathy, the capacity to put yourself in the shoes of others. If you don't have that empathy, you will not be able to lead. If you don't understand the concerns, the hopes, the worries of the people you are leading, you will not be able to be a good leader. So empathy, put yourself in the shoes of the others, is extremely important in government or in business or whatever. That is an advice that I always give. Try to develop empathy with the people you are dealing with, because then even in a negotiation, if you put yourselves in the shoes of the other, you understand why they are asking for this or asking for that. If you're not able to do that, it's very difficult to negotiate, it's very difficult to lead. So this word, empathy, is extremely, extremely important.
You know, during the last workshop, we had two ladies from Africa who have been able to shape policy. And they were coming from the small business perspective, trying to influence government. And they talked about how many years it sometimes takes to change policy, how many years and how much data and how much advocacy they have to put forward to government. How can we think about streamlining this process so that it doesn't have to take years? How can we enhance the efficiency of these negotiations or the engagement? And how were you able to do it? Because in your tenure, we saw tremendous growth. We saw speed. That frustration, I mean, I don't want to have to wait 10 years for governments to change policy for SMEs. I might not have survived in those 10 years as a business. So I'm just curious, how did you take on that issue of efficiency and effectiveness with government, given how sometimes there are so many interests and it takes a long time?
Well, that requires a lot of leadership within the government, within the public institutions. Public institutions, by definition, are slow to change and especially some institutions, like, for example, the military institutions are extremely conservative. They don't like to change. And so you need to be able to stir things in a way that you create changes within the institutions. And every institution is what the people that form that institution are. And so you have to address the people, the key people in each institutions that are capable of promoting and doing effective change. You cannot change a public sector simply by giving speeches. You have to go you have to go in the institutions and produce a change from within. And that you do by permanent meetings. I'll give you a specific example. When I became president, one of the objectives was to fight poverty. I remember at the London School of Economics, I had a professor who then earned the Nobel Prize on Economics called Amartya Sen. He's from India, very important professor. I called him and I said, Professor Sen, I was your student 40 years ago. Now I'm president and I want to fight poverty using your methodology. It's called the Multi-Dimensional Poverty Index. And he said, oh, can you come to Oxford? And so I took the presidential plane and went to Oxford and developed a strategy to change the way that we measured poverty. Instead of the traditional monetary way of how much you earn, is the basic needs that people and the households have. And there was a complete change. But in order to be able to do that change, and he told me and brought some other people, you yourself as president needs to get every minister that has to do with this approach to be on board. And they will not be on board unless you, as president, are on top of them. So I start doing a weekly meeting of the ministers every week. How are we doing here? What changes are we doing here? And slowly but surely, they started all working in the same direction. This is one of the things that in government usually happens. Every minister is working in a different direction, unless the president himself takes control and says, everybody will work with the same objective. And I don't want rivalries between the ministers. I want everybody to work together to reach the objectives, then you will not be able to do it. So it needs a lot of leadership.
So, President Santos, not all of us are as lucky as Colombians are to have had you as president. Some of us have some very, very weak and short-sighted presidents. So what can we do to influence what happens in our countries? What are some practical steps we can take as mere citizens or even leaders in a small sphere of influence to ensure that some of these same changes occur?
Well, going to good schools, learning a lot. Education is extremely important in every country and in every generation and in every level of private and public sectors. Now, I think I'm a true believer in what is called by the economies the demonstration effect. Using examples, listen, see this example that is working, let's try to do the same. This is very powerful for institutions, for people, when they see that things can work, and that is a good stimulus for working. In many countries, especially developing countries, the problem of corruption is a problem that, in a way, makes a change more difficult. And then there you need to have also innovative ways of fighting corruption. In my view, the best way is to use the focus of public opinion. The best, more effective way to fight corruption and fight stagnation is simply to have a free press and the public opinion aware of what is happening. I truly believe this is the best way, more effective way to promote transparency, and transparency will facilitate change, and change for the better. I think this is something that you have to stimulate permanently. This is an ongoing responsibility of every good government.
Thank you. Thank you for that encouragement. We all have the power of the press, and that's where you started your career. Now, I know you're an elder, your grandfather, your father, and you're watching some of the biggest shocks in our generation. We have the Ukraine war, the Russian-Ukraine war, some people call it an invasion, climate change, so many other emerging challenges, a growing food crisis. How can we navigate these current shocks and risks? What specific strategies would you recommend? How can small businesses in particular adapt, pivot, and scale? But how can young people, how can those who are listening also get involved in addressing some of these challenges?
Well, climate change. I will tell you a small story about how I got involved with climate change. I was one of those citizens of the world who did not respond to the concerns of many people saying we're destroying the climate. But I had an experience when I was Minister of Defense with our indigenous communities. and I did not appreciate either the value of our indigenous communities until I got in contact with them and started learning from them. And I discovered the wisdom that they had, the knowledge that they had. And so when I became president, when I was elected, that same morning, I went up, I took a plane to some beautiful mountains in the north of Colombia, in the Caribbean, to our oldest indigenous communities. We have many in Colombia, but these are the oldest, to ask them for permission as a gesture to their existence and their presence, because they were called our older brothers. They called us our younger brothers because they're been in Colombia for much more time than any of us. And so I asked for permission to go to Congress and be sworn in. They appreciated that tremendously. And they said, okay, we will give you, they got together and they said, we will give you our permission, but you have to make peace, not only with the FARC, as you have announced, but peace with nature. Because nature is at war with the human beings, and nature is mad, and she will retaliate. And a week later, the worst Niña phenomenon started in Colombia, and for the first year and a half, I had to administer a flooded country. I remember we had no institutions to deal with this. We invited many people, among them, for example, Vice President Gore, went to Colombia, and he gave me a lesson on climate change, gave me a lesson of how Colombia needed to be a leader in that fight against climate change. And so that changed my views on many things. I created the Ministry of the Environment. I multiplied, as was said here, by 10 the protected areas. And I kept in touch with the indigenous community that they always said, if you want to have peace with nature, you need to understand that nature is equivalent to you as a human being. Nature, they have life. The rivers have life. The trees have life. And you need to be aware of that. Something that many people don't know, the country that suggested the Sustainable Development Goals was Colombia. Some people back in the year 2011, 12, I went to the summit of Rio Plus 20 summit on the climate change and on biodiversity, and we made the proposal of transforming the Millennium Goals to the Sustainable Development Goals. And we started negotiation with the rest of the world. And the year 2015, the Sustainable Development Goals became the agenda of the world. And that was a Colombian initiative inspired by the indigenous people. So I personally was transformed by these conversations and by the knowledge, and I became, from being a skeptic about the environment, and now I am green with passion. That type of change is what we have to try to get the young people, because the power and the future is for the young people. They are the ones who have the power, and it's their concern because they are the future. If we get them in the right mood to fight climate change, to correct many of the problems that we're dealing with right now, I am worried that the war in Ukraine is diverting, for example, the world from the number one priority, which I think right now is fighting climate change. We cannot divert from that priority, because it's the existence of the human race and of the planet, which is in danger. And so we must keep focused and especially try to stimulate the young people to become more and more involved, more and more of an activist in this fight to preserve the planet by stopping climate change, and to realize, like the pandemic has taught us, that in the world, if we do not cooperate among the different countries, what was said so many times, you are not safe until everybody's safe. If we are not conscious of that, then we will be in deep trouble.
Thank you so much. That's really a clarion call. We're not safe until everyone is safe, and climate change is the real war that we're facing. We're at war with the earth. Thank you for reminding us of that, and also walking us through your own discovery experience, where you're now a big climate champion. I'm going to open it up now to questions. We have a few questions already coming in, and one of them, I might unmute some of you to ask your questions directly, so you can put up your hands. But I'm going to start with Juan Ro, who says, Mr. President, I'd like to understand your opinion about the energy transition in Colombia. How can the big companies there, such as Ecopetrol or big multinationals mining coal in La Gualara, for instance, help in the transition? Do you think there's a policy window there for smaller sustainable energy companies to thrive? What role can big extraction companies play in the sustainable growth? That's a great question. Thank you, Juan, for asking that question. Did you get it all, President Santos? And it's also written in the chat box.
Well, in the case of Colombia, we depend a lot on oil and coal. Our main exports are oil and coal. Not for our own energy, because we have a matrix where 70% of our energy is hydraulic, so it's clean energy. So we're in a better position than other countries to make this change. Now, unfortunately, the present government has a double standard. They go outside and they promise that they will comply with the objectives of the Paris Agreement, and they went to Glasgow and they said, we are going to do X and Y. But they go back to Colombia and do exactly the contrary. We continue to increase subsidies on fossil fuels. They are now allowing the fracking to become a part of the extraction of gas and oil. Deforestation is continuing. So we have a sort of a double standard there. For also political reasons, this is a challenge for every country. How can you really make these difficult decisions to stop the exploration of oil? With what? How are you going to replace the money that you receive as a government, that you even spend in social policies? How are you going to replace that money if you don't continue the exploration or the production of oil or coal or whatever? This is a very, very important discussion right now that is taking place right now. I think that the correct approach is one that is called climate justice, that you need to give these type of countries a bit more time, provided that they take the decisions that should be taken. For example, the case of South Africa in Glasgow. The president of South Africa went to Glasgow and said, I want to stop producing coal, but you need to pay me to replace that. And he got $8.5 billion to do that. Those type of initiatives have to be taken by all countries. You need to be convinced that this is what you want to do, and you need to confront the special interests in the short term that are going to scream about the decisions that you have to take. But what we all need to understand is that if we don't take these type of decisions, we will all perish.
Thank you very much. Very clear answer. Come with a strategy. And he asked about small businesses and creating a policy window for these small businesses to enter the energy agenda. And I think what I'm hearing from President Santos is come with a clear agenda, build coalitions, build support, and amplify your voice, and change will happen.
And I think the transition towards cleaner energy has to be led in a way by smaller businesses. They are more adaptable. They can adjust easier. We have many examples of small coffee growers, for example, who have now a solar energy, and they prepare their coffee with solar energy. That is done easier with the help of the government by small businesses rather than by big businesses.
Yes, definitely. You're speaking my language. I believe small businesses can innovate and adapt much quicker, and they just need the enabling environment. Okay, we're going to move up to Professor Dube. I'm going to unmute you so you can ask your question. Professor Dube? Okay. Maybe you can unmute. I think I've asked you to unmute.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much, President Santos, for your presentation. I'm a professor at the Desautels Faculty of Management, and having pioneered with worldwide this approach that we call convergence innovation, very much like your third wave that you were talking about. I was invited in your country by the Food and Agri-Food Association about at the time you get your Nobel Prize for saying how can there be ways exactly what you are describing. You seem to have done this approach. I have two questions for you at this point in time. If I remember correctly, when Chris introduced you, I believe you also have training in business. And my question to you, my first question to you will be, how should policy training and business school training be changed so that from the beginning, their practice is along the line of what you just described? That's my question one. And then question two, government don't do just policy. They invest, they build infrastructure and so on. So what are your thoughts of ways in which government can nourish an environment so that the small and medium enterprise and the big one can more naturally work in creating both the social and the commercial? Those are my two questions to you. Thank you so much.
Professor Dube.
Ndidi, can you help me?
Okay.
I didn't quite understand.
The first one was, yes, she said, you know, she comes from she's a professor at the School of Management, and you've eloquently described how private sector and public sector have to work together. What should we change in management education to make that shift occur so that it's embedded in how we're already training students and preparing them? And so that was the first question, if you want to take that one first.
Yes, I think that in today's world, one has to start thinking of changing the definition of what is success for a manager, a business manager. What is success? I think this is changing very rapidly. success is not only making more profits for your stockholders, is taking care of your environment, is taking care of the communities around the business where you're in. So I think a very good way to teach tomorrow's managers, businessmen and policymakers, is to try to stimulate the discussion about the metrics of what is success, even for countries. GNP, gross national product, is no longer the number one indicator of success of a country, how much it grows or doesn't grow. You need other ways to define what is success. And this is a discussion that is going on right now. And of course, climate change is an ingredient that has to be there. How successful are you as a country in the next 10, 20, 30 years? Is how much emissions are you able to take away from what you were doing before? These type of changes, I think, are right now in this changing world absolutely fundamental for young people to learn and to be able to discuss.
Thank you. And you know, Professor Dubé's big push is around convergences, that we're all converging, right? All the sectors, all the industries are converging towards similar ideals, visions, and matrices. And I think you share that conviction as well, President Santos. And building that, embedding that into curriculum is so pivotal. Professor Dubé, do you want to take your second question?
Yeah, the second question was essentially, government are there for policy, but they are also there as investors. They are also there as building infrastructure and so on. So what could be a new way of thinking of governmental action that support the creation of this type of ecosystem, both for the education and for the enterprise themselves and so on? That was my second question.
I will give you a specific example of what I did with infrastructure, where supposedly governments have the responsibility of developing the adequate infrastructure for businesses to be able to flourish. But we did not have sufficient capital, resources. So we put in place public-private partnerships to build the infrastructure. It was a very successful. We, in the last 8, 9, 10 years, we've built more roads than in the last 200 years, more bridges, more environmentally responsible and sustainable infrastructure in a country which is extremely difficult because we have high mountains and jungles. So this private-public partnership with good regulation, with the correct incentives, was an innovation in Colombia that worked extremely well. I just put that as an example of how things can be done. In this case,
would you think that the digital architecture, similar like this, can help doing the same thing for the small and medium enterprise around the country that work more at local village and so on? What are your thoughts of thinking of building digital infrastructure the way we build bridges, for instance?
Well, I do think that, for example, at the local level, these type of partnerships with small businesses are possible. Having the state, the local, provincial state as a partner for small businesses in certain areas of the country, that would be ideal for the small businessmen and for the local government. But you have to change your attitude. Again, this traditional attitude of no, I need to regulate, I need to control the businessman instead of being my partner in doing X or Y. This is what you have to change, the sort of the paradigm, the way of thinking. But I do believe that, and again, I'm sorry to go back to the coffee example. Colombia, if you go to Colombia, you have a big difference between the level of development of the coffee regions and the rest. Why? Because the Coffee Federation went at a local level and put the coffee producers and the local governments to work together, to bring electricity, to bring roads, to have good schools, to have good hospitals. They work together. So you see in Colombia, sort of two different types of, two different countries in the rural areas, the coffee region, and this has been an example for the 65 coffee producing countries. Go to Colombia, say, what is it that you have as a structure that we want to bring to our countries? And we said, well, we have a private-public partnership working, and it's worked very well for many, many years. And so you have an example there of how you can do it.
Thank you very much, Professor Dube. Can we take a few more questions? Chris has put a good comment in the chat. He says, design regulations and incentives so as to align the private interests with the public interest. This is the underlying logic of a carbon price, as well as many other good policies. And I agree, but Chris, people are still arguing about what a good carbon price should be. So there's still some disagreement between some economies about the right carbon price. I know Europe is more aligned than other parts of the world, but I completely agree with you. President Santos, do you have a comment on this carbon price issue?
Well, we were the first ones to, in Latin America, to put a carbon tax. It's worked quite well, and the revenues of the carbon tax are earmarked to protect the protected areas, because it's not only you declare a protected area, but you need to make sure that the area will remain protected. And so we did that. Now, the price of carbon. This is a market that is in the making. Nobody really knows how that market is going to work. But what I do know is that it's going to become more and more important. And how you regulate that market is going to be crucial. I don't have the answers. I know that in the different big organizations that have to do with this, I am a member of the board of something called the Wildlife Conservation Society. They're very much seeing how this market could be used to stimulate conservation of wildlife. There are a lot of ideas, but still nobody has the answer of how to regulate it. I think this is one of the most interesting and important discussions for the next years, how to regulate the carbon market, which is going to be, according to many people, the largest market in the whole world of compared to any other product.
And I think that you're spot on. And I think this is one area where we see a huge divide between the emerging economies and the, I don't want to say developed economies, but the more advanced economies. Everybody tells me, Ndidi, you should be doing carbon farming in Nigeria. There's so much money in carbon farming, but there's no formal market for carbon farming. We don't know how to enter the market, and I'm in agriculture. And the market is closed out to many African farmers. And those who tell you they're doing carbon farming, creating smoking mirrors. So it's a very, very, very delicate and interesting space, and continues to show the divide, even in terms of what is happening, where it's happening, and really if it's happening. Chris, do you have a comment on carbon farming before I move on to Juan?
Well, I've never heard the expression carbon farming, but I think what you're referring to is the use of agriculture in what is called a carbon offset. Which
yes, but it's called carbon farming.
So it's a great expression. I mean, I think that the challenge, and I think the future will see a lot of this. I think the challenge in all kinds of carbon offsets is to establish that the thing you are doing, whether you're planting trees or whether you're taking carbon out of cement or whatever you're doing, you've got to be able to establish that that activity is genuine, right? That it's legitimate, that you're actually reducing carbon relative to what you would have done in the absence of the carbon price that you would then feed into your business model. And I think that is, I mean, the UN discussions are talking a lot about carbon offsets. Some countries have introduced carbon offsets. A lot of people are very skeptical of carbon offsets precisely because they think they are, as you said, smoke and mirrors. And I think the challenge is going to be to establish their legitimacy. And there are many cases where I think they are not legitimate. And there are many cases where I think they are. And we have to figure out how to tell the wheat from the chaff. And that's not so easy.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think, like President Santos has said, we have to involve everyone as we determine the future, and even the definitions of these terms, and then how we calculate them, and who determines whether the offset has occurred and hasn't. So yeah, definitely the transparency, accountability, and ensuring that lower income individuals and farmers from lower income countries or emerging economies have a seat at the table. Juan, I'll come to you now. Juan, let me ask you to unmute.
Thank you very much, Ndidi. President Santos, thank you very much for being here with us. I am a Colombian student here at Maxwell School of Public Policy. So it is especially exciting for me to have the opportunity to talk to you today. I was wondering about one, and this is maybe a little bit like Colombian specific, but I do believe that some of the Colombian experiences can inform other jurisdictions. After the 2016 peace accord, some former FARC EP combatants founded new businesses. I remember three that are especially successful. One called La Roja, which is beer. Then there's these other businesses relating to mountain gear and backpacks and that sort of thing, and a ragdoll business. And there have been also failures. So, and the nature of this, I guess that failure responds to the nature of the business world, but I think that you would agree with me that these businesses thriving is about more than just creating new businesses. It is also about sustainable peace. So I was wondering, do you think that there are opportunities for either big businesses or for new policies to help these former FARC combatants thrive in their entrepreneurship?
The answer is yes. And as you very well say, some have flourished, others have failed. This is life, not only for former FARC combatants, but for any business. Some fail, some are successful. But I do believe, and this is something that should be done more, is precisely because they were part of the war. They need sort of a bit like an affirmative action in terms of more help to be able to flourish. And you're seeing good examples of this. I myself have a foundation that I created with the money that I earned as a Nobel laureate that precisely is trying to match the small innovative ventures of the former guerrillas with people who are demanding those type of products. And we've been quite successful. Right now, even some of them are being exported. I myself, I'm right now in New York, and they showed me a store where they're selling the products that are being manufactured by the former guerrilla fighters in a small town, very, very far away from the capital city. So to answer your question, yes, I think this is something that we need to do. It's good for everybody, but has a plus of complying with the peace agreement and in a way strengthening the implementation of the peace agreement, which in every situation, the implementation of peace, is always difficult. The reconciliation after 50 years of war is very difficult. Not only in the case of Colombia, we go to South Africa, what happened in South Africa, or in Northern Ireland, they're still discussing, or in Salvador, or in Sri Lanka. Making peace is, and I can tell you, making peace is more difficult than making war. And it requires more perseverance, and requires more strategy, and even requires a different type of leadership. Making war, you have a vertical type of leadership. You give orders and you rally the forces against your adversaries, against your enemies. Making peace, you need to persuade, you need to convince. You don't give orders. You tell people, for example, to be able to forgive the people who did so much damage to your own family, and that is difficult. Let me tell you, that's very difficult, but it's the only way to heal the wounds of a war and continue.
President Santos, we have another question from Kada, but I want to build on this question from Juan, because I look around the world and we have now, it's almost like we're regressing in a lot of ways, from the democratic open leadership that you exemplify, the leadership committed to leaving legacy, to the strong man. And it's concerning to me, and I'm sure it's concerning to many other people listening. What can we do to reverse this? I still believe in the power of voice, the power of media, like you've talked about. Well, what are some other steps that we can take? And what are you and the elders doing to reverse this in many, many countries around the world?
Well, it's no secret to anybody that what we call liberal democracies are in a defensive situation right now. Autocracies are gaining territory, are gaining strength. And this is a product of many things, but I attribute that a lot to something which is called polarization. Democracies depend on the ability of a society to make transactions. Societies all around the world are composed of different interests, and parliaments and Congress, those interests are represented there, and they need to be able to make transactions. You get this, but I get this. But polarization makes these transactions very difficult, because if you start not even recognizing that other people have other interests, then to make transactions with those people becomes much more difficult. I read every so often and reread a speech that George Washington made when he was offered for the third time to become president. He said, no, democracies need alternation, need new faces. We don't want people to be indispensable, but democracies need one word called moderation. And that's what we're losing. Polarization is, in a way, doing away with moderation. And if you are not moderate, if you go to the extremes and you become passionate about the extremes, that makes the art of transaction much more difficult. So what is it that we need to do? And unfortunately, the media, and especially the social media, instead of contributing to do that, it's making things worse, because social media, what is doing is stimulating the polarization, because you tend, as a naturally, to hear and be connected with the people who think like you do, be on the extreme right or the extreme left. So that, in a way, stimulates polarization. So you have to start working on how you counteract the effects of social media and this polarization. How can you make the center more attractive? Again, the center right now is boring. Nobody wants to be there because it's a boring place. But if you go to the extremes, people are much more passionate and they feel stronger, but that does away with democracies. And this is one of the big challenges that we have right now. How do you reinvigorate the center? How to reinvigorate moderation, which is the necessary condition for a democracy to work?
Thank you so much. Lots of wisdom there. Kara, go ahead.
Thank you very much. President Santos, it's a very huge honor to be here with you. My question is related to the mining sector. Nigeria is trying to diversify its revenue sources, and mining happens to be one area that has not been fully exploited. A key project that the government is coming up with is that of building up artisanal miners into certain cooperatives or societies that would help push the mining sector and build an indigenous mining industry for the country. Has there been an example of what you did in Colombia that can help Nigeria going forward? That is, if there was a scheme sort of that is being proposed in the artisanal mining sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kada.
Unfortunately, we were not very successful in this area. And we have the same problem as in Nigeria. And I think we need to stimulate what you just mentioned, artisanal and sustainable ways of mining. We have a lot of illegal mining, which is causing tremendous environmental damage. Rivers have been contaminated with mercury because of the gold mining, for example, the illegal gold mining. This is a problem we have. Colombia has a big problem with drug trafficking. We are the #1 exporters, unfortunately, of cocaine in the world. These mafias have also gotten into illegal mining. And this is one of the big challenges that we have right now. So unfortunately, Colombia is not a good example for Nigeria in this specific challenge that you have. But we need to do what you were saying, small miners that create cooperatives and in a sustainable way maintain their business.
Thank you, and thank you for your honesty. So, Kada, that's one area of opportunity that you can innovate and lead. Thank you for your question. Now we're going to move on to Camila.
Hello, and also from Colombia, so it's an honor to have you here. So my question for you is, how can government support small businesses in developing economies, and can promotion of a small business improve communities?
Camila, thank you. You probably have heard of this institution called Impulsa, which we created some years ago. These are small innovations that have the support of the government and has been extremely successful. Colombians, thank God, have an innovative spirit, especially certain regions. And if you give them the correct and necessary tools, you will find a very positive reaction, as we have found with this specific example of Impulsa, to the extent that the Financial Times made an article about 2 or 3 months ago about how innovative the Colombians were in small businesses. So I think by giving them the correct incentives and the correct tools, and stimulate young innovators, this is something which for every country would be extremely important. I am a great believer in the strength of small and medium enterprises. In the case of Colombia, 85–90% of our employment is in the small and medium enterprises. And if you want to stimulate employment and formal employment, you must stimulate small businesses and integrate them into the formal sector. And to do that, you cannot have a formal sector which is hostile to the innovator. Many people sometimes go to the informal sector because they say the formal sector is hostile. It's very difficult to do business in the formal sector. Governments should be very aware of this. They have to make life easy for the small enterprise, for the innovators, for them to flourish and become part of the formal sector. Otherwise, you will have the problems that we still have in Colombia, but there are other countries in Africa and Latin America that are worse than Colombia, a big informal sector, which by definition is much less competitive.
Thank you so much. And thank you to President Santos for your time with us today. This has been incredible. I am leaving energized, inspired, and challenged. And I'm sure everyone here is. And if you were in the room, we would have given you a standing ovation. So I want to thank you for your time. I'm leaving with a few key words. The first one that struck with me is empathy. Leaders need to have empathy. And we need to cultivate this from a young age. Put yourself in the shoes of those who you serve. Step out of your comfort zone and go and see them in the mountain. Hear their first-hand experiences and listen and be ready to learn. That's the first word I'm taking away, empathy. The second that I heard you talk about is the critical need to collaborate. Private, public sector collaborations, nonprofits, the third wave, thinking through who should be at the table, collaborate with unusual suspects. It might be uncomfortable, takes time, but this is critical. And then the third word, of many, many other words we're taking away, but the third word for me is really humility. And I think it's shown through with everything you said. Your commitment to lifelong learning, your commitment to calling Professor Amartya Sen and saying, I want to come and learn from you, your commitment to reading, your commitment to saying, I keep on learning and growing and exposing myself to new things so that I can stay fresh, relevant, but I am not too big to learn. Many of our presidents feel too big to learn. Many of our political class feel too big to learn. And I've heard that loud and clear from you. So thank you so much for leaving us with so much wisdom and knowledge. And I'll just ask you for one final charge to the young people on here. You've heard from the Nigerians, the Colombians, the Canadians. what is your final charge to the next generation? What do you expect from them as they take on the mantle of leadership?
Well, again, thank you for having me. And I expect from the young generation compromise with preserving our planet. I really hope that even the kids in the schools, get more enthusiastic about helping to preserve our planet. I am very worried of what is happening. Today we have more people displaced by natural disasters, by climate change than by wars, even with the Ukrainian war. So we must not forget that. And it's the young people who can make things happen. And so I stimulate all the young people to get more active in preserving our planet.
Thank you so much for that charge. You are all climate champions. So join the fight, join President Santos and all the world leaders to ensure that we build an earth that we can preserve for future generations. Thank you for your time, sir. On behalf of the Max Bell School and the entire leadership, I want to thank you for the sacrifice of your time, for giving your life to service and impact, and for inspiring the next generation. God bless you, and we'll definitely be in touch. See you very soon in person in New York. And please give our best wishes to your family, especially your lovely wife. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you everyone for joining. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.